On a Tuesday morning when nothing special was supposed to happen, I walked out with my coffee and almost dropped the mug. An 8-foot white vinyl fence was slicing my backyard clean in half like a plastic guillotine, a padlocked gate right where my apple saplings were meant to go, and a bright yellow sign screaming that this was now private HOA property and trespassers would be prosecuted, which, just to be clear, meant me on my own grass. Yeah, that happened. And before you ask, no, I hadn't lost my mind or wandered into the wrong yard. My name's Jack Mercer. I live at the frayed edge of Cedar Hollow Estates 3 years this spring. And when I bought the place, the hook was that extra acre out back. A little patch of scrub and wildflowers, and a seasonal creek that thinks it's bigger than it is after a rain, the sort of corner lot where you start sketching a workshop in your head. Maybe a greenhouse, maybe rows of fruit trees like a promise I could keep. The survey markers were there. The deed was clear, the taxes. Believe me, I paid them from day one without complaint because I liked the idea that what's mine is mine. You know what I mean? So when I found a crisp letter taped to my front door demanding $600 a month in land usage fees for property I already owned and saw it signed in permanent ink by our HOA president, Evelyn Craig, I laughed first, then I read it again. Then I didn't laugh because everyone in Cedar Hollow had stories about Evelyn, how she measured grass with a ruler, how she'd cite you for a mailbox that was charcoal instead of shadow black, how she ran the association like a boutique dictatorship with tasteful planters. Some called it dedication. Most called it something you can't print on a family newsletter. But even for Evelyn, this felt bold, like a magician sawing a lady in half. Except the lady was my backyard. I did the adult thing. I took a breath, pulled my documents, the original survey, the deed, the county stamp, and I walked to Evelyn's house, which used to be a 2-car garage and now looked like a municipal annex. Filing cabinets, stacks of violation forms, aerial photos of every roof with little red slashes where joy goes to die. And there was Evelyn in a blazer pressed so sharp it could slice cheese, holding a clipboard like a shield. And she launched into this speech about how the HOA had voted to reclaim unused land for community benefit. She said it so confidently, I actually glanced around for a hidden camera. I showed her the deed anyway. The survey, the tax receipts, and she barely skimmed them, waved a hand like she was shooing a fly, told me HOA bylaws supersede private preferences, and announced that my acre had been selected for a members-only dog park with key card access and a premium fee schedule to be determined. Then, with a smile that never reached her eyes, she said possession is 9/10 of the law, which is cute unless you're talking about my lawn. The next 48 hours felt like a parody of suburban progress. I stood at my kitchen window and watched crews drill posts and set benches. They installed stainless steel dog waste stations like they were planting flags on the moon. Then came more signs. Cedar Hollow Canine Club grand opening. This Saturday membership rates listed like a gym photo ops ready to roll, and Saturday morning Evelyn stood behind a ribbon big enough to wrap a small car giant scissors-in-hand camera from the community newsletter flashing while she christened her dog park on my land. I went to the board, of course, but the board wasn't a board, it was an audience that never got to leave the theater. There was Neil Patton, a skittish treasurer with a whisper you had to lean into. He told me Evelyn kept files, real files. He said the kind that lead to 18 months of citations. If you cross her, and there was Tessa who shrugged in that suburban way and said a dog park would raise property values as if that squared the circle of cutting someone's yard in half. It was clear nobody in their structure was going to stand up, which is when I remembered who I am and what I do, and let me back up a sec. I'm a contracts guy. I work for a real estate development firm, reviewing easements and covenants and all the little clauses people skip. And 3 years ago, right after closing, I filed something with the county environmental office that felt like good stewardship at the time and turned out to be my lifeline, a conservation easement on that back acre recorded and indexed forbidding permanent structures, commercial use, or alterations without the owner's consent. Because that seasonal creek feeds a meadow that feeds pollinators that feed the world. It sounds grand, but it's also just the truth. And the penalties are not pretend. The county starts fines at $500 a day per violation, and counting benches, posts, stations, padlocks, signage, altered grading. I had at least a dozen violations racking up by the hour. I put everything in a tidy folder because that's my love language. Photos, receipts, the deed, the easement, a simple tally of fines that was already creeping past 48,000. And I called my attorney, who, bless him, specializes in HOA overreach, and sounded way too excited. He polished a cease and desist that read like poetry to me, and we circled Thursday on the calendar community center monthly HOA meeting. Because if you're going to be reasonable where the microphones are. The room that night was a casserole of frustration, folding chairs, fluorescent lights, the smell of paper and coffee that had been braved too long. Evelyn at the podium reading off grass citations like she was calling bingo then new business, and she lauded the Canine Club for generating revenue, floated an agility course, and that's when I stood, folder in hand, and asked to address the board. She tried to gavel me into silence, said I wasn't on the agenda, and the room erupted. Homeowners who'd been swallowing their pride for years suddenly wanted to hear everything, so I walked to the front and laid it out like a recipe. You can't mess up. The land is mine, county records confirm it. The HOA has no claim, and the conservation easement doesn't just say no, it says no with teeth. I read the fines out loud. 48,000 and climbing. And I offered two paths, the soft landing and the hard landing. Remove everything immediately. Restore the land. Pay me 35,000 in damages, and we shake hands and go home, or we litigate and the penalties triple. And personal liability becomes not just a word, but a line on your bank statement. I watched faces like a weatherman studies clouds. Neil went pale and slipped out a side door. Tessa stared at her phone like it might open a portal to a world with less accountability, and Evelyn, cheeks turning a shade of plum, declared that homeowners associations possess sovereign immunity within their boundaries. Look, I don't like speakerphone theatrics, but sometimes life asks for a little theater, so I called my attorney and put him on. He explained calmly that there is no such thing as HOA sovereign immunity, that claiming it can edge toward fraud, that state law and county ordinances do in fact apply to neighborhoods with matching mailboxes, and the room, you could feel it shifted. People started standing up with their own stories. A widow named Lydia mentioned how Evelyn fined her for wind chimes after her husband's funeral because the tones drew attention. Someone else brought up $10,000 in decorative rocks at the entrance, while the playground swings squeaked like ghosts. Grudges that had been quiet suddenly found a microphone. The board huddled in the corner for an executive session, which was 5 anxious adults whispering while the rest of us watched. And when they returned, it was 4-1 to comply with my demands, the one being Evelyn, and a special election was scheduled to review her presidency. The applause was not polite, and I could have ended my story. There rolled credits. But pride is clingy. And the next morning, a complaint landed at the county zoning office claiming I was occupying HOA land without permission. The investigator who called used the tone you use with toddlers and liars, and I told him to come over that afternoon. He did clipboard and steel-toed boots, and he walked the line with me, found the survey markers, read the easement, took photographs, and you could see the switch flip. The stop work orders came out like parking tickets on a snow day. The county opened a formal case against the association for violating conservation protections, and he scheduled a hearing for the following week. He also pointed out that the work orders bore Evelyn's signature, which put her in the crosshairs personally. Ignorance isn't a defense when you're the one holding the pen. Sunday rolled around, special election day, and Evelyn showed up like a candidate for benevolent monarch glossy flyers, a PowerPoint titled Harmony Through Order, bullet points about standardized mailbox shades and consistent grass height, a slide of happy dogs that looked like stock photos, She called the settlement an investment in community cohesion. She called the county fines fake news. And when the votes were counted, the math was brutal. 112 to 3, and one of those 3 turned out to be a duplicate she'd submitted as anonymous, which the new board president, a retired attorney named Bill Harper, gently set aside while telling her thanks for her service. Bill went into triage mode, met with the county, negotiated the big stick down to $65,000 in combined fines and restitution in exchange for immediate compliance and a promise to put grown-up guardrails in place. The association's insurer, which had been sitting in the back row, clearing its throat, filed a civil action to claw back $25,000 from Evelyn for willful misconduct. And 2 weeks later, we all ended up in county court where Evelyn tried to represent herself with a binder full of HOA bylaws and printed Facebook posts from other presidents saying things like, "We run this town." The judge, stone-faced, explained that HOA rules do not outrank state law, that possession is 9/10, doesn't apply to theft dressed in pastels, and he hit her with $15,000 in personal fines and 300 hours of community service when she declared she didn't recognize the court's authority. He added 100 more for contempt and suggested that if she kept talking, she could appeal from a place with bars. There's this moment I keep replaying. Not the court, not the vote. It's fence removal day, early Saturday, thin mist over the creek, the vinyl panels stacked like giant blank pages waiting to be written on neighbors, drifting over with gloves and thermoses. Lydia with her wind chimes wrapped in tissue, Neil hanging a few steps back like a man who's finally chosen a side. He cleared his throat and slipped me a thumb drive, emails. He whispered, "You didn't get them from me." And later on that drive, there were threads where Evelyn mapped out the seizure weeks in advance, called it a revenue stream. Joked about how Jack won't even notice until the ribbon cutting the same Jack who was holding the other end of a fence panel while we guided it down together. And I'm not gloating here. I'm saying there's a kind of justice that looks like sweat and cooperation and the thunk of a post pulling free from earth that didn't want it. We restored the ground as best we could. Seeded native grasses staked my fledgling trees. The county inspector pointed where the creek bank needed shoring. Lydia tied her wind chimes to a branch and the soft notes threaded through the morning like forgiveness. And a month later, I saw Evelyn in a neon vest picking trash along the trail as part of her community service. Her gaze fixed on the ground, the inspector nearby checking off her hours. I didn't wave and she didn't look up, but I wondered what story she told herself now. Whether she understood that power isn't a costume you wear, it's a responsibility you hold gently. People ask why I push so hard. Why not just let the dog park happen if it helped the community? And I get it. We all want nice things, but I keep thinking about lines about how easily we start redrawing them when it's convenient. How a fence shows up overnight and we decide it must belong to whoever bolted it down first, and how the word community gets twisted when someone uses it as a crowbar. Maybe you think I overreacted. Maybe you think I should have paid the fee and moved on. Or maybe you think I didn't push hard enough, that Evelyn should have faced more than fines and service. I'm not here to write your verdict. I'm just telling you what happened on my little acre and what it felt like to stand up and say, "Not this time." Now, when I walk the yard, the grass clean again, the creek gossiping over stones, I can almost hear a different kind of fence, one built of neighbors who finally spoke up, of a board that remembered it serves the people who pay the dues of a president, who learned the hard way that rules are supposed to protect, not bully. The camera of memory pulls back, and there we are, tiny figures in a wide shot, morning light, catching the last of the mist. Lydia's chimes answering a breeze, Neil's shoulders loosening like a confession. Finished me kneeling to press a seedling's roots into the soil and promising quietly that next spring we'll have blossoms, not barricades, and that we'll keep watching the line, not to divide us, but to remind us where respect begins. So I'm curious, where do you draw the line between individual rights and the greater good when the people claiming the good are holding the bolt cutters do? Bylaws carry moral weight if they trample the law itself, and what even is community, if it's built on consent, that can be revoked with a padlock. You know what I mean? Drop your take. Tell me if you think the HOA model needs reform, or if this was just one bad queen with a cardboard crown. And if you've got your own fence through the yard story, let it loose in the comments, because sunlight is a powerful disinfectant. If this hit a nerve, share it with the friend who thinks a clipboard outranks a deed. Subscribe. If you want more true stories where the little guy doesn't roll over and sound off. Below was justice served. Did we go too far or not far enough? I'll be reading, and I'll bring the shovel if we need to plant something new.